Well, another day, another Trump vengeance firing. Tonight, Christopher Krebs got fired by a Trump tweet, which Twitter has labeled inaccurate. Christopher Krebs was the administration's cybersecurity official who came from Microsoft to the government to work on making our election processes secure. Last week, Christopher Krebs said that the 2020 election was, quote, the most secure in American history. And tonight, in a Twitter statement that Twitter said is not true, Donald Trump said, quote, the recent statement by Chris Krebs on the security of the 2020 election was highly inaccurate in that there were massive improprieties and fraud. Therefore, effective immediately, Chris Krebs has been terminated as director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Luckily for Christopher Krebs, he is going out with the badge of honor that he will need for the rest of his life in explaining why he went to work in the Trump administration. He can now legitimately say he went to work in the Trump administration to help guarantee the security of our elections, and he can prove that he did a good job because Donald Trump fired him. If you leave the Trump administration on January 20th without being fired by Donald Trump, you will carry that disgrace to your grave. That's what Emily Murphy is trying to do. She is the administrator of the General Services Administration who is personally refusing to sign her name to the paperwork that would officially begin the transition of the Biden-Harris to the Biden-Harris administration. And Emily Murphy is the typically corrupt Trump appointee who is working every day now in violation of a law that orders her to authorize this transition and provide the necessary resources, including office space, to the Biden-Harris transition team. The law doesn't give her a choice. We'll hear more about the details of that law tonight from Harvard's constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe. Emily Murphy has 64 days left in her job, and she's still afraid of being fired by Donald Trump for doing the right thing, for following the law. Emily Murphy looks at Christopher Krebs tonight and sees what she doesn't want to be, a fired Trump official. She does not see and cannot see Christopher Krebs' clarity of moral vision. She does not see and cannot see Christopher Krebs' faithfulness to his oath of office. Emily Murphy is a typical Trump appointee who is now violating her oath of office every day and remaining faithful only to her oath to Donald Trump. And so we should not at this point, in covering the madness of Donald Trump in the final 64 days, we should not at this point focus our outrage on the firing of Christopher Krebs as much, although there should be that outrage, but as much as we should focus our praise of Christopher Krebs for doing his job, for helping to secure our election process, for following his oath of office, and we should share in his pride of a job well done. Tonight, Christopher Krebs told NBC News, quote, I'm proud of the work we did at CISA. I'm proud of the teammates I had at CISA. We did it right. Earlier today, Williamsport, Pennsylvania, took its place in history, not just as the permanent location for the Little League World Series, but as the place where former New York federal prosecutor Rudolph Giuliani returned to the courtroom as a practicing lawyer for the first time in 30 years and was instantly disgraced by doing the kind of thing that he does on the Fox propaganda shows. Rudy Giuliani stood up in federal court in an election lawsuit that does not in any way allege fraud and said to federal judge Matthew Brann, an Obama appointee, quote, it's a widespread nationwide voter fraud. And when Judge Brann pressed Giuliani on the issue of fraud, Giuliani was forced to admit in court, quote, this is not a fraud case. Now, Giuliani had to say that because he was not on TV. He was in a courtroom. And if Giuliani did not say that in that courtroom, he could have been disbarred, because then Rudy Giuliani would have been lying to a federal judge in court. And that could have been the end of Rudy Giuliani's right to practice law in the United States of America. Rudy Giuliani is very likely the single worst lawyer to appear in an American courtroom today. And he wants to be paid $20,000 a day now for I think it's $20,000. Yeah, $20,000 a day for his role in the frivolous Trump lawsuits, all of which have already been thrown out of court or are on their way to being thrown out of court. Now, Rudy Giuliani wants $100,000 a week, $400,000 a month to go into courtrooms and allege widespread nationwide voter fraud before judges then force him to admit, as he always will, that there is no fraud. He wants $400,000 a month to do that, and that money will not be paid by Donald Trump. That money will be paid by the contributors who Donald Trump continues to solicit and beg every day in multiple emails a day with begging subject lines like, "Can you chip in?" In any other context, Donald Trump would call the people who contribute that money to be paid to Rudy Giuliani to humiliate himself in court suckers. That's the word Donald Trump would use for people who fall for a scam like that if the scam is not being run by Donald Trump. When it's being run by Donald Trump, he only calls those people suckers in private.